Okay, I'm here. Ready to go. Sorry for you waiting, Jeff.
No, don't worry.
Your time's way more valuable than mine.
I'm on holiday today, so it doesn't matter.
How are you? Are you sure you want to do this? Do you
No. This is fine. I'm happy doing stuff like this.
Cool. So I've got a cheeky look at your LinkedIn profile, and it's one of those profiles where you scroll down
through your career history, and then you've got to show 5 more experiences at the bottom. You click it, and then you go down, and there's another show 5 more experiences. You've worked at so many places, which is awesome. And I'd love to talk about your career and what you've learned. Can you tell us first of all a bit about who you are, what you do, and where you're from?
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me today. So yeah, I mean, I've been a lifelong techie, really. I first started programming when I was 6 on a Commodore VIC-20, which I definitely shows my age. Yeah. I mean, that's a very, very. I mean, it had 3.5K of RAM, and I just went through the education system, went and got my degree in computer science, and I've actually just signed up for an MSc in cybersecurity. I think really as a lifelong techie, I think we should have that ambition to keep learning. And I've been out of the official education system, the actual academic system, for 20 plus years. I thought now is the time to go back. But yeah, so I spent the first 20 years of my career at a consultancy called BGSS, and a great place to work. I really enjoyed my time there. So a lot of my experience was there with clients, and it's interesting seeing the industry grow. I mean, the industry was much smaller when I joined it, and people get, I think, very worried about, are they going to use AI to automate out my job? Well, all the way along, my path through computing, jobs have been automated out, but then it just keeps going up to the next level. Every time we create an abstraction layer, systems get more complex. Yeah. Systems start to build on their complexity, and we'll always need that, well, in my opinion, for a long time, well beyond our lifetimes. We'll need those problem-solving skills that a developer brings to the table. When I say developer, I mean that doesn't just mean people who necessarily develop in C# or Java or C++. I think more people will, I mean, there's the teaching in schools now. More people will start to learn how to code. And I saw an interesting documentary recently on this, the topic of learning to code. It's not just about the languages, it's also about the structured thinking. It's about learning how to break problems down into, because computer science is a form of discrete mathematics, and it's basically breaking problem spaces down and being able to think them through. So actually, it's helped me in other areas of my life. It's given me a bit of a systems thinking way of approaching problems in and outside of work. I mean, would I make a great web designer and maybe service designer, or probably not. I mean, I enjoy the creative arts. So outside, I think my hobbies outside of work also sort of mirror my interest in technology, because I collect and repair and play synthesizers, which has a very kind of computing feel to it as well.
Yeah, that's cool. So tell us a bit more. So you mentioned that when you were young, you started playing on a Commodore, and you learned. So how had you decided that computer science was the direction that you wanted to take?
So I started programming it. One thing was my father showed me like a very simple basic program, and I thought, that is so cool. We've got this thing here that is mind-bogglingly powerful for its time. I'd never seen anything like it. You plug it into the TV and you could make it do things that you asked it to do. And I thought, that's really interesting. And I just kind of got more and more into it. And then when I got towards college and university age, I thought, is there actually a career path in this? Because I was young and naive. I didn't really know much about the industry or, who Alan Turing was. A lot of these learnings sort of came along the way.
Had you ever played with anything? So before college and university, before you made the decision to go to university and study computer science, had you ever made any programs or anything along those lines? Were you already capable?
Yeah, I'd written quite a lot of games and programs, but nothing that being released. Nothing that being released. Nothing that I was slightly too young, I think, to be in that era where people got in on the kind of home programming games thing around the ZX Spectrum era. I was a little bit young to that. but I had a reasonable understanding. And when I was 16, I started learning C as well. So yeah, I had quite a lot of programming experience before I went to college and university.
This is self-learning as well. You were teaching yourself. Were you using guides? How were you learning at such a young age?
So there's actually a really, really good book, a great big thick book, but it was really good. It was just called Teach Yourself C in 21 Days or something. And I went, right, well, it's just... and actually the Commodore Basic book, the one that came with the VIC-20 and the C64, was actually really well known for being like a very approachable user manual. So yeah, can you become a self-taught coder? I think the answer is yes, you can. I mean, actually a lot of really great coders who I've met in time have been self-taught. But then when you come to actually learn computer science, then you learn the science elements of it, the actual how it all works under the hood. So then it becomes more interesting, I think. Actually learning some of the CS fundamentals has really held me in good stead. Working with things like financial applications, especially if it's things like low latency and trading platforms, having an understanding of what's going on under the hood is actually really important.
So you went and studied computer science at university. How did you find learning from lecturers and in this very formal environment from teaching yourself? Because I'm assuming there must have been some sense of impatience whilst you're having to learn. Or did you enjoy it all? Was it all? Did you fit right in?
Interesting. The first year was universities are, I think, and this is no kind of real disrespect to them, I think, but it's just they always will lag behind industry.
Yeah.
So some of the stuff in the first year was like business management and a bunch of topics that really weren't very technical. I found this at the second year onwards where we started getting to object-oriented programming, which I'd done a little bit of, but I didn't really understand fully. So when we actually got into what we call programming language paradigms, then you had to do OO, functional, declarative programming. That was really interesting, and I learned a huge amount there, and things like formal specification. So I actually I took a lot away from it, but I also did a year's placement as well at a software house. So
what was that like? What was it like working at the software house?
That was probably what made me decide I didn't want to work in the software house and like doing products. So I thought consultancy would be maybe more my bag, because I wrote a piece of software that ended up being in production for maybe about 10 plus years. And I thought, well, if I'm working on this now, I'll be working on the same problem space in 20 years' time. I thought the challenge would not be there. So I thought consultancy would better fit my nature of enjoying change and curiosity.
How were you thinking so logically about, how did you know yourself so well at such a young age and quite fresh into an industry to be able to make such a big decision? What was it that you felt? I think if I was at that age, even now, I would be like, oh, I reckon I could get bored of this, but I'll stay here because this is the best I can do. What was it about you that made you think, you know what, I think consultancy is right for me? How did you know that?
I mean, part of it was because the university had a reasonably good sort of career. It had a reasonably good careers path and advice. And I interviewed at several places, and this was before the dot-com bubble burst, so there's actually loads of opportunity. There weren't many developers around in West Yorkshire at the time. Yeah. It was a much smaller market. Yeah. And so I just looked at what was available and what they did, basically what they did and how interesting it sounded to me. I mean, I think you probably maybe credit with too much self-awareness. I think a lot of that came along in later life, but really I picked the one that, I didn't pick the one that was paying the most, funnily enough. I picked the one that sounded to me most like a reasonable long-term solution. Because I think also back then people weren't moving around in their careers as much. 20 odd years ago, people nowadays moving every 2 years is perfectly acceptable and kind of almost encouraged in the IT industry. Yeah. But back then it was people moved a little bit more slowly. So I thought, well, where's going to actually keep me employed for a number of years? And I thought, well, this place ticks all the boxes. And BGSS was, that they had a lot of very interesting clients that were growing. I mean, there were only 23 people when I joined, and about 1,000 when I left.
Wow!
So they were up and coming, and it was an interesting ride.
So the software, just briefly, the software house that you worked for, what stack were you working with? How did you find yourself adapting after university? Or you said it was a placement. Was that in between university, like a bit of a sandwich?
So it was a sandwich year, so between year 2 and 3, and that was C++.
Yeah.
The Microsoft found, what was it, Microsoft Framework something. I forget the name of it now. Microsoft Framework Components, maybe. Basically, it's old style WinForms in C++. I know the work was okay. I mean, I learned a lot about professional software development because up till then, I'd never really had to commit to anything that had been used by other people.
What did you learn?
There was making software that would be usable by and maintainable by other people. What
were the things that you learned whilst you were in that placement year? Because you have been self-taught, so I'd assume you'd be quite proficient in CPP from the practice that you said you'd experienced before. So what did you learn when you're here?
I think there's a different level of professionalism expected when you start committing code to other people are going to be maintaining and using. So learning about things like clean code and refactoring really. They're more. So there's that two sides to the coin. There's computer science, and computer science hasn't changed very much over the last 35 years. Yeah. But software engineering has. The actual engineering, the application of science has really changed. Yeah. And learning the actual engineering discipline was super important. And when I joined BGS, who are a much more professional organisation, I mean, they were doing very, very large, well-known clients. International banks and things like that. So the level of professionalism was another step up again. So I had to really learn how to be a professional software engineer.
Did you ever feel any senses of, so whilst you were doing this placement year, this sandwich year, did you ever feel any senses of overwhelmment, of being overwhelming? That's not a word. Did you ever feel overwhelmed having to learn something? Because it's very different to bootcamp life. You learn over 3 months, you get hammered with it, and then you're straight into the role. So it's likely you're going to feel nervous. Whereas yourself, you've been learning out of curiosity and joy on your own from a young age. Then you've gone to university. This is the career you're in. Did you ever have any moments of self-doubt whilst you're doing that placement year?
Oh, I think that when you first get into an environment where you're writing code, and you are among much more experienced engineers, of course, you feel some self-doubt. Yeah, and it's just kind of managing that really, and not losing faith in recognizing where you are. Well, recognizing where you are in your career as well. Yeah. I don't think anybody really should expect somebody who's fresh out of a boot camp or a university degree to churn out the quality of code that somebody with 15 years experience necessarily has. Although, not all experience is created equal. This is what I found over the years. I've interviewed hundreds of developers over the years, maybe even close to 1,000. And not all experience is created equal. You can see some people who've really made the most of their experience in the industry and some who haven't. Yeah. And I think that'd be my number one career hack for anybody really is choose your projects and your experience wisely. And if you feel like it's not growing you, if you feel like, if anything, you are stagnating or falling backwards in your practice or in your skills, it's time to move.
So tell us a bit more about your career at BJSS. You've joined this company. You mentioned that they had 23 people, which means that they were really in their early phases then. What's your initial role as just a software developer, a junior?
Yeah, I was a grad software engineer at first, but I was very quickly put on to managing two small projects. When I say managing, I mean just basically maintenance and extensions too. I mean, software systems were a lot smaller back then. One was for a very well-known international company. One was for an Italian bank. Yeah. So because there weren't very many developers in the area, and because it was back then everybody's really working in C++, in financial applications. I mean, there was some Visual Basic kicking around. We had to. The pressure ramped up very quickly. I mean, I'd say that if you put people under the pressure that we were put under back then, nowadays there'd be HR involved probably.
Really?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult. I mean, there was a lot of very long weeks. But the industry was super. It was very young and testosterone fueled, and that was not healthy. So I mean, that was reflected by the very poor gender balance and diversity balance in the workplace at that point. It was very young white male rock star programmer getting paid quite well, but also having to work 80-hour weeks. But that was not the fault of the company. That was just how so BGS were a great company and still are a great company to work for. it's just that was a moment in time where everybody was rushing to get established, and software development wasn't as, I think as a discipline, wasn't as refined. So things like unit testing and things like that, and continuous integration really weren't used as much back then. I think maybe even continuous integration, I think, was barely being thought up when I first joined. So the software industry is becoming more stable and more professional and more disciplined over time, which is great, because a lot of it would be kind of, we've made these very scary changes to financial application. We just have to suck it and see, because there's kind of 50 million rand stuck in a bank transaction somewhere in South Africa, and we can't move it. And if you don't fix it, you have to get on a flight to South Africa. that was a genuine situation. We managed to fix it with about an hour to go. Wow,
that sounds terrifying. How did you go into management so quickly? You brushed over that quite
well. So management. So not management as in people management. Management as in looking after a couple of clients. I think it's because there's just so few of us. But also then quite quickly, I ended up doing some time effectively running the test facility for a client as well. Helping format, see what their testing process was, how they're going to, what a well-formed defect looks like, what a well-formed test looks like. So that was actually really, because back then we didn't have very many separate testers. The DevOps was really not even coined as a culture at that point. So we did a lot of things, and I think actually doing some testing and doing some management of how testing should be running at what was a very early stage gave me a lot of perspective.
How did you handle that transition? So as you would have joined as a software developer, you're normally given tickets or parts of a project, and it's your job to work on that project and bob jobs off. When you're managing a system, you have to think about lots of different things, and you have to look at the bigger picture, I'm assuming. How did you handle that?
So a lot of it was direct client contact. I mean, we didn't really have ticketing systems back then. Yeah. I mean, even source control was way more rudimentary. Visual source safe, and I'm sure some people will remember that. It was a lot of it was about managing client expectations, and because the systems were simpler, they tended the actual complexity rate of change tended to be a little bit slower. But also the team was small. I mean, in some cases, it was just me.
Yeah. How long, at BJSS was it until you started to get your own team? Because that must have been a big jump.
Yeah, I mean, it was only a smallish team. I think maybe about. So I think I had a team of people working on testing with me within about 5 years.
Yeah.
It was only a small team. And then I ran a few other teams at BJSS over the years, either as tech lead or as architect. Culminating, I guess, with the biggest one, which was e-referrals, which I was the joint architect on with another colleague of mine. Yeah. He was another great architect, and we and this is a part of my self-awareness as well. I think I went on that journey and we figured out together that actually we both did different things, even though we both had the same job title. Yeah. We both had very different approaches to things and very different things that we were good at. So actually, between the two of us, we managed to carve the work up because it was a lot of work. It was the second largest national system for NHS Digital, e-referrals, which was replacing Tubes and Muck. Yeah. And there's this moment where we were all booked into the same meetings, and it became impossible because we were double and triple booked. And thought we're going to have to divide this up. And we realised that actually we had areas where we were both strong and areas where we both felt like actually we could hand this off. And then that was learning to do that was a really defining moment, I think. It's not delegating, it's learning to kind of federate, really.
Taking on challenges, breaking them down, and then giving them over to people in this.
But also thinking about, well, there's certain aspects of the system that actually this other architect, David, was great at, and he had more interest in. Yeah. And there's some areas that I had more interest in. Mm-hmm. And actually, between those two, there was although we overlapped a lot, we kept each other really well informed, and we had a great working relationship. Mm-hmm. It meant that we could be way more efficient. But then that also meant that, well, we also thought about how we work with the tech leads, because I mean, this was a I think at its peak about 120 people on the program. It was quite a large project. Yeah. So it's also how we disseminate that information with the tech leads, and that was a very challenging delivery. Mm-hmm. I think any other software house might have not delivered. Yep. It was very challenging, but we made it and we went live, and it saves the NHS lots of money.
So how did you manage that? So you've got yourself and David, I think you mentioned, you're sharing this project. You had tech leads, then you had your software developers, and then you had the client as well. How did you make sure that you were all, obviously sharing this alongside David, how did you make sure you were all on the same path? How did you keep track of this project and the direction it was taking, and at the same time use your skills to make sure you were going above and beyond for the client? How did you go about that?
That was really, really challenging. So we used a squad structure. So we had 3 development squads. Yep. I think, 3 development squads, one of which is in Manchester and 2 which were in Leeds. Mm-hmm. And we also had the client on site with us as well. So it was very collaborative. It was an interesting one because it was replacing an existing system, but this existing system was incredibly complicated. So there was a lot of effort involved in. We naturally hit a lot of rework we had to do, or a lot of requirements we had to do, because when people presumed the system did this thing a certain way, when you dug into it further, you went, it's something different. So we were pretty structured about how we engaged. So we made sure we had regular engagement, daily engagement with the tech leads. Yeah. We were all on the same floor, apart from the team in Manchester, but we dialed them in remotely. And we made sure we were also quite structured with how we documented everything as well. Yeah. It doesn't sound very agile, but actually we had to be fairly nimble because it was a shortish timescale for such a large system. Yeah. But we learned a lot doing that project, I think, on how to really deliver something. I mean, it's the largest delivery BGSS have done today.
It's huge. It's a huge client as well. I mean, it literally impacts lives. How do you? So I know from the projects that I've worked on and the teams that I've worked in, it's all been very new for us. It's new worlds, and so spotting great ideas has been really easy because we're all on the same level. It's easy for us to talk. We just say it because we're all just a group of mates really working on a project. Whereas in a larger company with a larger team working for a client like NHS Digital, and I'm assuming back then things maybe were a bit more formal. They hadn't moved over to the new way of doing things. So how did you catch on to fresh ideas? How did you make the most out of those who are working on the lower levels?
So GDS does kind of promote coming up with ideas and running hackathons and things like that. So we did a lot of Skunkworks projects. We did something in our spare time. We did some with the clients present as well. We'd just book in the odd evening. We'd do some Skunkworks on UI or on new tech. And when we were starting up the project, because it's such a large project, we did several proof of concepts where we kind of learned to fail fast, right? We were considering using a triple store, so we looked at a few triple stores and went, none of them perform as well as just using straight Postgres, so we'll bin that idea off. But the development team, although the team was very large, the development team wasn't enormous. So actually, and we kept in reasonably good contact with them all. So, and he's also, although we had a structure, it wasn't as I guess a hierarchy. So people felt like they could come to us and say, "I've had this idea, or I spotted this, or we've got this technical debt," and we would work with that. So we'd manage technical debt. We'd keep a log of any kind of proof of concepts we want to do, any kind of innovations we want to try out, and any ideas really.
How would that be yourself and Dave that would be giving off the final sign off on those ideas, or
if for trying things out, yes, we'd say, okay, let's assign some. So there's one point where our build time got too long, so let's basically assign some dev time to actually bring those build times down. We did. We brought them down from an hour to 5 minutes. When it came to putting stuff into production code, we worked with the client. So the client had a number of architects who were really good. I mean, really strong architects who had a lot of healthcare experience. I mean, some of the best I've ever met. So what we did was we had regular meetings with them. So if we saw stuff, we would go through that with them. We'd say, here's what we are proposing. We'd walk through those design elements and those ideas with them. And they were really receptive to it because they wanted to move away from the kind of old school Oracle vendor lock-in kind of thing towards let's try and use some open source things. Let's try and use modern tech. And eventually, this is after I'd left the project, and it then migrated all over to AWS as well from a private data center. So it's constantly evolving.
How did you find, you mentioned that there were architects at NHS Digital as well, but you assume that with these establishments there's rules and that you have to stick with them. Did you ever find that your side, BJSS, I'm assuming, were a lot more entrepreneurial yourself, being curious?
We could move quicker, yes. So there's an impedance mismatch between how quick, three things: how quick BJSS could move, how quick NHS Digital wanted to move, because the architects and the people in there wanted to make a difference, and then how quick the government and the NHS and NHS England and things like that would allow them to move. Because if you're delivering a clinical system, it has to pass clinical safety assessments, along with other things, along with GDS assessments. So we just had to manage our expectations, I think, a little bit within there. But we were working within GDS guidelines, so that encourages things like open source. So actually, they were super open to quite a lot of tech, but obviously all had to go through a lot of assurance. That was the longest. That was the sort of the most. I guess the piece that cost the most out of the project that we weren't expecting was the assurance piece. But it was all really necessary, because you can't have a patient's referral go missing if there's something like a heart, for some cardiogram or something. You can't have that happen. Lives could be lost.
Did you ever get frustrated with the pace at which, if you came up with an amazing idea and you were like, this is really going to have an impact on the clients and the people that are going to be using it, did you ever get frustrated with the length of time? Because that would put you off those ideas at some point, surely.
I think everybody has that at some point in their career, and it's a moment of, you have to understand there's some things you can directly influence, which is your own internal state. There's some things which you can partially influence, which is kind of your team and your immediate environment, and there's some stuff you can advise on, but you can't actually change. And if you just get frustrated, if you spend your time being frustrated at it, you're just wasting your own emotional energy. There's one point. So I've done a lot of UI design on a new patient application for this system, and it was decided not to use it because of the clinical safety assessments required. So if we just replaced it with effectively the same look and feel, then it was easy to pass through any assessments. But then a couple of years later, they had a bunch of designers came in, and I looked at the design they came up with and went, that's just my design that somebody's taken and turned into a wireframe. It was 100%. It was not close. It was actually just the same thing, just turned into a wireframe. And we went, okay, fine. And eventually they did develop it that way, but it was a couple of years later.
Did that not bother you?
You've got to remember, you're always building software unless you're a software house and you're building your own product, you're building software for somebody else. You don't own it. Now you own the quality. Now you should take responsibility for the quality of it. Yeah. There's an ethical decision to be made when somebody says, just don't bother testing that. Just slap it in. It's like, well, this is a financial application. You can't say that. Yeah. There's a professional ethics point of view from quality, and also the people who you will work with, and that's a personal decision. Yeah. Some people won't work in gaming for maybe religious or ethical reasons, and that's okay. And I think everybody should feel guided by their own ethics on how they conduct themselves in the industry. But also, there's something called the Programmer's Oath. Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin, wrote. Now, Uncle Bob is a kind of slightly controversial figure as of late. He's kind of right wing, but take aside his personality aside, his contributions to things like the Agile Manifesto and to clean code and to things like the Programmer's Oath are great. Yeah. And it really is about, well, I'm not going to do any harm with my coding. I'm going to make sure I do the best job I can and leave the campground cleaner than when I started. So sometimes you think I'd love to innovate, but it's not on you. You're doing it on somebody else's money. Yeah. So you have to accept that actually sometimes you're not going to be able to put this on the blockchain because it's somebody else's money you're spending.
So you've worked as an architect, and you're chief engineer. Is that what's your current title? Chief engineer. So you make decisions on. Well, firstly, tell us what an architect does. I'm going to sound naive here, but I've never.
So I wrote an entire article on this because it was fascinating to me, because I had to dig around myself. So architect itself is a word, I believe it's Greek, from architecton, which is master craftsman, basically master builder. So really, but architect is such a broad term. Originally, many years ago, we just called ourselves technical architects, and that's a generalist. That means you should understand a bit about the infrastructure, about how it's built, how the solution design works, how the enterprise architecture works. But as that got bigger, it was kind of no longer really kind of practical to confine that within one role. Hence, we have enterprise architects. And enterprise architects effectively align the delivery of enterprise systems in the context of the enterprise, i.e., they're thinking about the actual business itself, the business goals. So it's actually kind of very, very, very top of the tree level. Whereas a solutions architect might be more thinking about, well, what parts of the system go together, what components of the system go together to form a continuum. And then a technical architect might be more thinking around how does this continuum of components, how does this actually fit together really in a physical kind of technical delivery sense? What kind of libraries do we need? How should we be deploying it? But then you've got all the other different kinds of architects, like cloud architects and data architects. So there's a huge range in the roles. But I think the commonality between them is they should all of them should really be good communicators.
Oh,
You've got to be able to
really?
communicate. So one of the things I do on an interview for a sort of tech lead or architect level is, tell me about a system. Here's a draw.io, here's a blank draw.io page because we're going to do it remotely. It'd usually be a whiteboard. So tell me about it. It doesn't have to be UML, but tell me about it. And the clearer they can make that, and the more consideration. So it's also about the holistic thinking. If you show holistic thinking, and you can't know everything, but you can at least understand how it looks with the concerns.
What do you mean by holistic thinking?
So if you just think about, I'm going to write this software, and like, well, okay, how does it have to, how big does it have to scale? Are 10 people going to use it a week? 1 million people a day?
Yeah.
10,000 people a second?
Yeah, okay.
How's it going to be deployed? How's it going to be tested? How accessible does it have to be? A lot of non-functionals, really, and also, and where does it fit within? Also, where does it fit within the enterprise? Is this just a side system, or does this fit in a part of a wider ecosystem? And as the IT sector is growing, the ecosystem thing is becoming more important.
So you're saying that the art of being an architect or someone of that senior position, because you're a decision maker, is not the knowledge that you have. It's your ability to communicate your ideas and thinking. Yeah,
and also to have that kind of open thinking and to consider as many pieces as possible of the puzzle, and to be able to get that across.
I've always thought that it's about, when I hear the word architect, I always thought that means that whoever is the architect just knows everything about everything, and that's their job to be super brains.
Many years ago, I mean, probably even before my time, that might have been true, because when there's fewer systems that are smaller, they probably could fit the problem space in their head. Mm-hmm. Now systems nowadays, especially if it's an enterprise system, which really are a federated group of smaller systems, mm-hmm. It's almost impossible to fit it on your head. There's no way you can know everything in tech. It's thousands of lifetimes worth of learning. Yeah. And I trust, and part of the best architects I've seen, they trust their tech leads. They build up a relationship with them, they trust them. So they have trusted advisors. So when it comes to certain libraries or certain ways of working or tech, I just have to go, well, I've got to trust your opinion on this. I might go away and do my own background reading if I need to contribute, but really, you've got some of it has to be delegated slightly, but it's still managed in as much as the fact that you don't want to have a bit of a kind of technical free-for-all. Every team delivering their own technical stack, every team working their own way. So there's a little bit of element of trying to, and if you try and rule with an iron fist and just say you will do this, that's also doesn't go down well. Yeah. So as part of it is also trying to build up that collaborative way of working that says we'll all agree to work, we'll acknowledge and agree that we're going to work in this way because this feels like the right way. It might not be the perfect way, but we've agreed as a group. Yeah. This is how we're going to work, and this is the quality standards we're going to work to.
I think it's really interesting how, like, a computer is quite a solitary interaction. But what I'm learning is what makes a software house or any sort of group effort for making a product is the way in which the human beings interact with each other.
Yeah.
That seems to be at the heart of it.
So part of it is Conway's law, which is really interesting because, in my opinion, because if you look at these kind of, when you have silo models where you've got kind of your DevOps are sat somewhere over there, your architects are sat in a different city, in a different office, but then they're all working on projects. But if you've got that silo and then they're working on projects, that's like it's kind of almost like a matrix. And that means you've got two ways of communication, which is actually makes it more complicated. So this is why cross-functional teams work better, because they're just cut down. As soon as you go outside the cross-functional team, you introduce this kind of Conway's law effect where you're effectively building up lines of communication that your systems will start to mirror. Yeah. But I think in my career, the number of times where a problem was genuinely solved by technology, as in this was a technology problem, not an organization or a people problem, very, very small. Wow. It's really, okay, there are one or two very large systems where like, this is technically pushing the limits. Yeah. So some of my colleagues worked on Spine 2, which was technically pushing the limits because it was churning out, it's the world's largest message broker. Yeah. So that was technically challenging. That took some technical thinking by some big brains. But most of the other systems, really, it's about, organizationally, how is this going to work?
I think that's really, really insightful because it makes so much sense, but it's also, I don't know why, there's this weird thinking from my side. I'm quite new into this industry. There's this weird thought that to be good at this in this industry, you need to know everything about all the tech and you need to be really, really, really clever. But it turns out that it's your ability to think logically and to see the bigger picture and just help other people. It's all about empathy, it sounds like, and just understanding.
There's levels of emotional intelligence. Yeah, there's levels of emotional intelligence. There's levels of kind of a spatial intelligence as well, of understanding the problem space. Yeah. So even if you don't have like 180 IQ and a PhD in maths, you can still be a perfectly good technical architect. I know I don't have a PhD in maths or 180 IQ. You can be, obviously being technically skilled through practices really helps. Yeah. And it just takes diligence and practice. And most people it's really whether or not it's for you, because it's not for everybody. Some people think, I want to do coding because it's a good career, because it pays well. And they go, I don't really enjoy coding. Well, maybe it's not for you then. Yeah. Practice will get there. But building up emotional intelligence and kind of business and spatial intelligence really helps. And over the years, because we've seen these different layers of how we deliver systems, we've been through the JE enterprise era, and then went into the digital transformation era. And we saw a whole shift again. And again, this showed that it's the organization that needs to change quite often. So I worked with a large national retail cooperative. Yeah. Without naming them, but quite obvious. So they were taking their first steps into digital transformation. So we set up Co-op Digital with Mike Bracken, the ex-head of GDS. Yeah. And they had what we called delegated authority. So they were a very traditional IT organization. And that meant they moved slowly. But we set up multimodal IT using a kind of Simon Worthy model, which is the kind of the town planners, settlers, and the pioneers kind of model. And we kind of naturally fell upon that model, really, with DevOps in the middle. And by moving to this, a separate digital arm with delegated authority, we found we could deliver really, really quickly. So it was not a tech or anything else really that was holding that back. It was actually just the organization. And once we had that authority to move beyond that and to deliver in a modern way, while still being able to integrate with these legacy systems, actually we delivered what was pretty much unthinkable. We delivered a live system. 8 million people got recarded. We went live in about 6 months or so.
Why did you leave BJSS to go to Undigital?
So I have much respect and love for BJSS. I know the owners and the directors and a load of the people there are still great friends of mine. So I have nothing but fondness for my memories. Back in the early days, it was hard work. We all worked really hard. Yeah. Because that was the industry was forming. Yeah. And they were a great company that's still growing. But and we're just doing something a bit different. I mean, 20 years is a long time. Yeah. Not many people stay in that role. And I thought I got to the point of my life. I thought, if I don't move now, I never will.
Yeah.
So I was interviewing for the role of CTO at BGSS. I got down to the last two. It was me, Carl Austin and me, the final two. And Carl Austin's a great guy. He's doing a great job as BGSS CTO. We still remain friends. But I got those last two and thought, well, okay, I took that. And this is where you can take not getting something as a defeat or as a negative thing. I took it as a positive thing. I mean, obviously it hurt at the time. Like, okay, I didn't get it. I think, well, I got very close. It's a very large company. So that means there might be more out there for me. I can stretch my legs more. And it just came up that there was an opportunity at Digital. And it was about a year we were talking to each other to find the right kind of role for me. And I'm built from the ground up to be a people-first organisation. I spent the first 6 months just designing the organisation and how it will function as a people-first company. Yeah. I thought it's really interesting. And I thought, well, I'll leave BGSS on good terms. Wrapped up my work, handed it all over nicely there, and came over and then also got to work with a whole new set of people in a different kind of way, different organisation, much younger organisation, different approach to certain things, and it's really interesting. And I'd say I've benefited hugely from it. And I'm really thankful for that opportunity.
What's the difference in size and structure? So what's the difference between BJSS, which are really established now, compared to Undigital, which are quite...
Well, so Undigital are growing very quickly. So I think they're now in excess of 750 people. Whoa. I mean, they were about 350 when I joined. Yeah. So they've grown a lot. Yeah. The difference is the club structure, the club model. So each individual club can only get to maybe about 80, 85 people before a new club is spun off. So each club feels a bit kind of startup-y. So I'm part of the central team, effectively, because there's some glue holding all these clubs together. Otherwise, if you opened up 50 separate clubs, you just have 50 separate businesses. So there's this there's some central function that also deals with onboarding, with what we call our academy, so our upskilling, and also our tech strategy, our what we call BHAG goals, our big, hairy, audacious goals. For 2025. Yeah. So we've got a course set for 2025. So really, it's a very intentional structure. And I think it's based on a book called maybe right from the start or Built to Last. I can't remember which one of the two. I'll probably get crucified for not remembering which one it is. But the structure was really well studied, and it is a bit different. But we're operating the same kind of sectors and the same kind of technologies and the same kind of areas. So we bump into each other a lot. Yeah.
Do you find that your way of working has changed at Undigital compared to BJSS? Because it's a completely new set of people, so you're going to have to adapt to a new way of working, I'm assuming. Have you found that change?
I mean, I'd say it's a little bit more people oriented. And they're a little bit different about how they hire people as well, because they will hire to actually start building up a team before they have work, and then find the work to match that team, versus the other way around, where they kind of win the work then hire the team.
That's brave. Do you think that's a better? Because you obviously from looking at it from a cost, you're paying for a team that's not doing anything. However, you're paying for them to learn. I suppose you're encouraging them to grow in that time where they're not working on a project.
So we have onboarding and upskilling, and we have our academy, and we're just just launching a new e-learning suite as well. So absolutely. And we'll put in people in investment roles. We'll invest in tech as well. We've just done an investment piece for a major fast fashion brand, looking at how we can leverage data architecture and data science. So it's a slightly different way of working. I think the overall, because it's not as an older company, it's a younger company, it's got a slightly different feel to it. Yeah. And it's different, and it is slightly intangible. It's just a slightly different feel to it because it was designed intentionally from the ground up. Not better or worse, just different.
How do you come to, so the decisions that you make as an architect, how do you come to those decisions? How do you choose your stacks? And because they're quite because you're stuck with it. Once you've made that choice, you're stuck with it for the whole of the project. Unless
well, there is also something called the sunk cost logical fallacy. So if something genuinely doesn't work and you are genuinely just throwing more money after something, you have to know when to pull the ripcord and go, right. And people will say, oh, but we've spent this time. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. It's not, you can chuck more resources at it, but it's not going to work. It's never going to work. And it's knowing when to make that call. That's really hard. Yeah. But actually choosing in the first place, I started working on my sort of own really list of technology diligence. This again goes back to my time working with the NHS because they really encourage this. So you basically draw it up as, well, what are the options? And within those options, well, how much experience do you have in them? How mature are they? How much industry support do they have? Can you buy professional support? Are they in major release? Are they being maintained? A bunch of other things. There's like maybe 20 or so questions you have to ask yourself or you should ask yourself of the technology. Mm-hmm. I mean, things like, can you hire people in this technology? If you can't hire people, you've got a big problem because you have to cross-train everybody. And if you don't have best practices in place, that can become a problem really quickly. And then you basically score all the options against that and say, well, what comes out, what floats to the top? And then you log that in, and part of this is logging it for posterity because people quite often ask you a few years later, why did you choose that? Well, because why didn't you use Kafka? Well, Kafka wasn't built back then, didn't exist, but that's a genuine thing, so logging that down, what we call either a key design decision or an architectural decision record. It's a super lightweight thing. It's one page. What's the problem? What are options? What was the chosen option and why? Why did we choose it? And that's a rationale, basically rationale. And just keeping a healthy log of that stuff like that really helps.
Have you ever made bad decisions? Have you ever made? I mean, that's a really vague question. You know what I mean? Have you ever made decisions as an architect for projects and then been like, oh, that was a bad move? Or have you always been? Because surely you make mistakes. Surely you.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. There's one project where PHP was still really big at the time, and it looked like it was growing. So we thought we'd use PHP, but we didn't have enough in-house PHP knowledge, and and we just ended up really not using it for what it should have been used for. It worked in the end after a fashion. It just wasn't very good. Yeah, and it was one of those times where we thought, should we pull the ripcord? It was very close to being, let's just back this out, but we didn't. It worked, and it still is working. But I think if I, with the benefit of hindsight, wouldn't have chosen it.
How good are you? Because surely you find it hard to find the time to just sit down and play with code. Unless you do, I just imagine you're so busy with meetings and stuff.
I am very busy, but I also have time for my hobbies. So, I mean, my hobbies do include like 3D audio recording and 3D video recording and playing around with neural networks and things like that. So I do get time to tinker. So actually, when I do coding Katu or coding with people, it's a chance for me to practice too.
Do you think, are you still sharp? Would you say if you were thrown in?
I'm not up to the latest. I think I'm not up to the latest practice of ES6. But I can building, designing algorithms. I can still about hold my own. I'm not up with the latest language idioms or the latest frameworks as much anymore. I can still. I find problem solving is a transferable skill. Yeah. Understanding how programming language paradigms work is a transferable skill. Yeah. So really learning a bit of new syntactic sugar. Yeah. So I learned TypeScript to do it. So I did a talk on TypeScript recently, and I had to learn TypeScript to do that talk because there's nobody else around able to do it. So I went, I learned to do it, and actually, it's getting back into it isn't hard. People shouldn't fear that.
How long did it take for you to? So you're just doing it for a talk. I'm assuming you've not used it in work before. How long did it take for you to self-learn it? How did you go about teaching yourself that as well? Because you wouldn't have had time. You'd have still been doing your normal job.
Yeah, I had to do it out of hours. So basically, I had to think about what I was trying to achieve with that. So I was looking at the language features and what it actually brought to the table over raw JavaScript, and how to show those language features off in demo form. Yeah. So really, it's actually kind of simple. I just read up and did it. But I think again that goes back to having spent my entire career having to learn. Yeah. I think if I'd stopped learning, then that would have been a much harder thing.
Yeah. You've obviously had a very fulfilling career, but have you ever had moments of absolute sort of just feeling horrible and just not knowing where to go? Or do you think you've always known where you're going, always felt confident with the decisions you're making? Have you ever had any down moments?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a middle part of my career where I didn't know where I wanted to go next. I didn't feel like I was making any progress. And I think my motivation had dropped, and I wasn't giving it my best. Yeah. And I think so. There's a couple of things I think that really changed my career. One of them was admitting that I can be wrong about things, and that I don't need to know everything. So you've already touched upon that. That really helped. And the other one was actually starting. So I decided to start, well, I'm going to try and give back something. So I started writing. I started doing talks, teaching people. Giving something back gives one enormous amount of motivation and energy. Yeah. It's actually, I did this at the beginning of lockdown. I did a Yale University course on the science of well-being.
Yeah.
And actually giving is super important as like a mood booster and a motivation factor. It's along with kind of sleep, exercise, and social connection. Yeah. Really, giving is really very important. And in the IT industry, because I've taken a lot away from it, I've been paid very well for my efforts. Yeah. And I've obviously got had reasonable amount of career progression. So, but there comes a point where when you see, especially when you're using all this open source software, you think, maybe I should start giving something back.
Yeah. How did you go about? So firstly, I love the way in which you've found a lull in your life and the way you've addressed it by recognizing what's important in life. You mentioned sleep and being healthy and stuff. I think this is something I'm realizing. I'm 31, I think. So something I'm realizing is really important for me to do well in work. If I'm not eating healthy or sleeping well or all of these things, I struggle to problem solve. I can't do my job properly. But
yeah,
I really
I found something very curious the other day. When I'm really well rested, my chess rating goes up by about 150 to 200 points. Yeah, that says a lot. Well, more like when I'm not well rested, it drops.
Really? But,
yes.
So that's evidence there, and I agree. I think when you're outside of this heated, intense war, your brain somehow just comes up with solutions on its own naturally.
You basically, I've looked into this. When you're very tired or you're very stressed and you can't manage your heart rate, if you've got very very variable heart rate or you're very tired, you effectively cut off a lot of activity to your frontal lobe.
Whoa.
Which basically is the bit that allows you to do quite a lot of your reasoned thinking.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. This is something that's relatively new to me. Like, that kind of makes sense. So really, there is that urge sometimes. Like, I've got to push on. I've got to work. Got to work till 2 a.m. Got to sometimes just step away from the keyboard. Step away from the keyboard and keep yourself well. And also, it's about, in my opinion, what's helped me a lot is keeping my own internal state well. So letting stuff go. Being angry at somebody doesn't hurt that person, doesn't help you get back at that person. All it does is hurts you. And it uses up your emotional energy. Being angry, sort of desiring things you can't have, effectively like miswanting, I'd love a 10-bedroom mansion or a 150-foot yacht. Well, that's great, but it's just a distraction.
Yeah.
The more you manage your internal state, manage to calm your internal state down, your thoughts down, and rest and make sure you're healthy, the better the outcome will be for you. Because the only true thing you can control.
You mentioned that stepping away means that you can come up with solutions better. Whilst you're doing your job and you've been the decision maker and the lead on projects on numerous occasions for numerous projects, which means it's going to be intense all the time. You will have stress on you all the time, people relying on you from both sides. How did you take that time to relax your brain, or did you not? Did you just push through?
There's a mixture. So I think there's a mix. There's times where you think, okay. I mean, I didn't necessarily make the wrong decision, but I think I'd have made a better go at reasoning the right decision if I'd been more rested. Yeah. But I think a lot of people, when there's stress, people start to react to that stress. Yeah. And they start to make snap decisions because they think they have to make the decision now. Now, sometimes, I mean, if you're stuck in the path of an oncoming car, you have to make the decision now to move.
Yep.
One way or the other, standing there isn't a good option. Yep. However, and that's And that's a legitimate fear. That's where adrenaline should be pumping through your system, and that's where you should be moving.
Yeah.
However, in business, in computing, it's really rarely the case that actually you have to make a decision right this second. Whether with your heart rate up and kind of adrenaline, like kind of stress, and it's maybe getting a bit tense. Yeah. Really, you can step away. For the most part, you can step away and you can spend some time to make a decision. Now, you might not have the benefit of months, weeks, maybe even days, but you'll have the benefit of minutes or hours, usually.
I think I always wonder how many leaders think like this, or whether it's something that leaders like to say they're considering it, but it's really hard to actually implement because stuff has to happen at the end of the day. You can't rest. Do you think that when you've been hiring, you mentioned that you've hired quite a few developers, when you've hired them and you've been managing them as a team, and you want the best, you want them to make the best decisions possible, you want them to be on their A game, do you ever try and focus on their lives outside of work to make sure that they are relaxing? Do you ever see them stressing and struggling and overworking and then think, as a company, we need to stop this?
All the time. So I'm one of the mental health champions. I'm also a trained mental health first aider and digital. And all the time, and Andy's are really, really good with looking after mental health of their what we call Andy's, our members of staff.
Yeah.
And we ask each other all the time. We have a regular a mechanism for regular random catch-ups. And there's one of the first things like, how are you really doing? And it's okay to not be okay, because people writing code, committing code to production systems, you don't want them doing a half-cut job because they've got something going on that's distracting them. So quite often I'll encourage people, and it's like, I need to get this done. Does it really need to be done today? Can you just step away for a few hours? Because mental wellness, especially during this year, is super important. It's one of the key things we have. Our own internal wellness is one of the few things we have, and people need to protect that. That's when it comes to life, Gautama Buddha said this, like basically you have to be an island unto yourself. And you need to be able to rely on that island of the self when things get really hard, because you can't necessarily rely on somebody else. No, it's nice when you can help others or that people are there for you, but really making sure you're mentally well is, I think, one of the most important things you can do for yourself.
But how do you think companies can manage that within their team? I think that, so especially, let's say, for example, a startup, you've started a new project, you need to keep your profit margins spot on. You want to bring in new talent. You can't afford to pay them necessarily, amazing wages, and you don't really have time as owner of a small company to sit down and think with them. Do you think that's wrong? Do you think we need to start realizing that the whole reason why we're all working is to improve our lives? Like, it's all about us. It's not about the project or the money.
I mean, any endeavor in tech, in my opinion, should be for the betterment of mankind.
Yes.
And not everybody agrees with that. People have different ethical compasses and different ethical systems. But really, everything should be tried to be bettering our experience somehow.
Yeah.
So developers aren't always money oriented. I know plenty of people have taken pay cuts to do something they really believe in. Yeah. But you can't pay people less and give them a bad environment and give them no opportunity to do a good job. Mm-hmm. It has to be, it's like an iron triangle. You've got to give people, if it's going to be a bad environment and kind of low quality environment, then you've got to pay a lot of money. Yeah. But if it's an environment that maybe nurtures innovation and high quality software, people will just come to you and they'll say, I don't care if I'm taking a 20% pay cut, because this is something I'm really interested in, or something that aligns with my kind of moral compass or my ethical standpoint or my value system.
How do you create that environment as a leader yourself? How do you go about making sure that your dev teams have an environment where they are relaxed, where their brains are ready to tackle challenges and be innovative? So
there's several things about this. So one of the things is, although a lot of our teammates quite have contact with clients, is if that contact with the clients is becoming far too much of a distraction, is start to put in something a little bit, put in more of a buffer zone. So when I used to work for BP, and one of the leads on that, who's a great guy, he introduced golden time. And I thought this was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. And it's basically, we were at one end of the office, so he could form a gateway between the business, who were spending a lot of time with us, and us. And it was like, I think it was 3 or 2 till 4 every day, or something like that, a couple of hours a day, where basically email off, phones off, no internet apart from if you need something to solve a problem, and no talking to anybody unless you're pairing or you need to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So if you get blocked, there's no point in sitting 2 hours being blocked. That's just pointless.
Yeah.
And it was much earlier in my career, I was skeptical. But do you know what? We got an entire day's work done in those couple of hours. And then we also got some work done during the work. The productivity boost was amazing. So it's protecting the team's productivity and quality. Yeah. So sometimes I've had to fight really hard to say, to manage expectations of a client that we're not going to do the bad thing. Just hack this into life. We're not going to do that. Yeah. That takes a bit of a kind of a game. Sometimes it feels like a bit of a game of chicken. Yeah. You have to stare. It has to become a bit of a staring contest, because there's some things where you go, this is going over the line, and some people say, well, it's their money. Well, I pay for this. You get it. Well, not when it comes to breaking the law, breaking GDPR rules, breaking financial services laws. Effectively acting or doing something completely unethical, which probably does break one of the aforementioned laws. So, okay, they get to choose what technical direction and what they want, but they don't get to choose necessarily force us to do something unethical. And as technology leaders, we can make a stand on that. We can say that there's a line in the sand. We are not going to behave in an unethical fashion.
It's crazy how important people skills are in this industry. There's a false, maybe it's just me. There's this false, what's the word? Perception that tech is all about being, smashing a keyboard and solving problems like that. But in reality, it's so important to be collaborative and to be able to connect to your natural instincts and just and take life on in that way.
Absolutely. I'd rather pay developers to write fewer lines of code. They used to measure developers on lines of code delivered per day or bugs fixed per day, which meant they either just wrote loads more code or they wrote loads more bugs in so they could fix them.
Yeah,
that's when they say about I think it's Goodhart's law, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a useful measure. Yeah. So I'd rather pay developers to not write very much code at all, but to actually write the right lines of code. It's the right lines of code to write, and that means working collaboratively to find out what those right lines of code are.
I agree completely.
I agree with you.
I used to work in a call center, and one thing that I noticed that used to drive me mad was that when targets were set, people on the phones would then focus on the targets and not the customer, or the whole point of being in there. And I don't know why. It's fear. Hiding behind targets is fear, I think.
It's just human. You look at how the Ofsted reports work, how the quality of care for the NHS works. Anytime you put a target in and the people have to meet,
they distract from the actual point.
It's a distraction.
Yeah.
And it means you will almost invariably, as part of human nature, people will chase that goal. Yeah. Now you can do healthy gamification, but making it like somebody's objective to write 100,000 lines of code in a month, you're just going to get garbage code.
Cool. Where do you see yourself going in the future? Because you're pretty. I mean, where'd you go from where you are now? where do you see yourself? You're so like high up. You're a chief engineer. I don't understand what's next for you on the horizons.
I think in the fullness of time, some kind of CTO role, maybe for a sort of small to medium size enterprise. I think I'd see that's where. But I think even beyond that, keeping on teaching and doing and speaking about the future of software engineering and computer science. I think it's really important that the people who are established in the industry. There's actually quite a few of us. The number of developers roughly doubles every 5 years. So the number of people with 20 plus years experience compared to the number of people with under 5 years experience, there's a huge disparity. It's orders of magnitude. So it's, in my opinion, I think it's really important for us to effectively pass down some of these good practices and also try and protect the ethics and the how we work in the industry and make sure it's sustainable. I think we have to lead from the front on that one. We have to make the industry sustainable, because it keeps growing. It's not going to slow down. It's not going to, not anytime soon. It just keeps going. If you look at IT recruitment, other areas of recruitment are down 25% or something on last year. IT recruitment is down 1%, and they reckon by next month will be above where it was the year before. So IT recruitment and IT isn't slowing down. I mean, it had a little dip, but apart from small dips, it's not slowing down. And we have to make it sustainable, otherwise we'll end up in a situation.
I agree. For anyone who's entering the industry or quite early on in their careers, what advice do you have for them? Because you've really done it all. So what advice do you have for them if they want to progress and go into being an architect?
I think, first of all, find the right kind of dev coach, the right kind of mentor. When the right student is there, the right teacher will be somewhere around. If they're not in your organisation, find them somewhere else. Find them somewhere else within your organisation if they're not in your team. Never stop learning. Don't just, as soon as you're static in IT, you're starting to move backwards because it moves too quickly. But also find out what it is about really you value about it, because focusing, there's so many options now. The number of options in IT really when I joined the industry was being a software developer or a network administrator, and that was it. There's now so many options. You can go into so many different areas. Is try and figure out, and you might want to do this with a career coach or a mentor, or do it yourself. Figure out what it is you really value about it and set a course. I think it's okay not to have a 10-year plan and like a final goal. It's okay to enter kind of a bit scrappy and just go, right, I'm moving into tech because I like tech. It's okay to start a bit scrappy, but you should start thinking about, where do you want to go with this? It might become the first couple of years, you really are finding your feet, because the idea of being a developer versus the reality of being a developer are probably quite different things depending on where you are.
Yeah. How do you, so for somebody like me, this is very selfish now, but how I find that I can do lots of different things and it's really hard for me to concentrate on one because my brain won't let me. I like variety. And more importantly, I like working with people. I'm not really bothered about theory. How can somebody like myself concentrate and focus on those different parts in order to move forward?
Well, I mean, depending on what it is, setting yourself some SMART objectives. Have you come across the term before?
Probably when I did business studies a long time ago, but I can't remember.
It's basically SMART objectives. So they're things that are effectively they are self-contained and they're measurable and they're time-bound and things like that. So they, if you write them down, if you commit to them, you're more likely to do them. Yeah. But don't take on too many things at once as well. I think we're all taking on too many things at once at some point, and it all gets done poorly. Don't do 10 jobs poorly when you can do 1 or 2 jobs really well, which is really hard, because saying yes that's one of the other things. Is actually I've got a lot of my career success for what it is through saying yes to things, but also brought myself a lot of pain by saying yes to too many things.
But you have to say yes, though. I've been having this conversation lately about just really simple things. If you say no, you'll miss out. You get FOMO. Do you not think that's just part of a successful mindset?
It really is. Yeah. Because you'll see the shiny other tech over there. Yeah. And part of it is always remember, if you're comparing yourself to somebody over there, you're comparing somebody else's external experience, like the external veneer, to your own inner experience, which is always going to be different. So you always, when somebody else probably over the other side is looking at your position going, oh, I wish I'd done that. So always also, keeping with the software developer, the programmer's oath, it's like always do your best at what you're doing. And if you can't do your best at what you're doing, put it down.
Yeah, I agree completely. Have you got any more little tidbits of advice for any budding developers who want to become chiefs or anything along those lines? Any more little gems? I don't know what the word is.
That's a good question. I think the sooner you start focusing on best practice and understanding a testing mindset and quality, the better. It's very rare people go, oh, this software is too well tested, it's got too few bugs in it, it's too well designed. No, people don't say that. Yeah. I mean, if you over-engineer something, that's different, and the temptation is there as an engineer to over-engineer stuff. Simplicity and elegance. If you look at karate masters, they have an economy of movement, a simplicity and elegance. If you look at people kind of doing showy moves, either in demonstrations or movies, they're very big, kind of flowery moves. Actually, masters of crafts quite often have an economy of movement. And that should be the same with your code and your tech stacks. Make them economical, but make them high quality.
I'm an actual black belt in karate, although I did it when I was like 13 or 14.
Which style?
What, Shotokan?
Same here. I'm a knee down in Shotokan.
Really? No way. So I stopped when I was 13, so I can still remember my first few katas, but I get lost. There's one kata, I think it was for the purple belt, but I really want to remember, but I can't remember them. But I understand the point you're making. I went into boxing after doing that, and you're so right. It's all about conserving energy. It's just like an animal when it hunts. If it can't get it, it just gives up. It doesn't keep pushing through. It just saves it for another day.
It's trying to be simple and elegant with everything as possible, while keeping it readable and usable. I've seen people make stuff very, in inverted commas, simple, condensing something down into one line of code. It's unreadable. Don't do that. But I think it's okay to invest a bit of time in, like, have the kind of, you say, okay, I know I'm a good Kotlin developer or whatever, but also then experiment in another tech. Say, well, maybe I'll do a bit of Rust just to see what it's like, kicking tires on it. But know which side your bread's buttered. Don't go, okay, I'm going to do this next project in Rust when there's nobody else in the team knows it and you don't know it properly yourself.
Yeah, that's. I think I've known people who work on little projects randomly just to explore the product, not the product, the language. Sorry, but honestly, Jeff, thank you so much for all of your input there. You've got some really interesting opinions.
No, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad. Speak to you soon. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Cheers, Jeff. See you, mate.